What's up, everybody? Welcome to a brand new episode of the 715 Green and Gold Tailgate Podcast as part of the Man Cave Podcast that is brought to you by our good friends from Hy-Vee in Eau Claire. Don't forget to follow and subscribe to both podcasts. We're up on like Spotify, Apple, YouTube. And if you're on Apple or Spotify, don't forget to follow, subscribe, but also rate. 5-star rating and a positive review because that helps others find the podcast. That helps other people find both podcasts. So looking at the two free agent signings that Green Bay did in day one of the legal negotiation period here. Start off with the first one that was reported, offensive guard Aaron Banks. I'll admit, I was actually I was surprised that Green Bay went and invested in an offensive guard. Green Bay's always big on offensive line and such, but I was a little surprised that they went out and committed $77 million, 4 years, $77 million to an offensive guard. That one kind of came out of left field. I'll be honest with you. And not saying I hate it. I'm not saying I hate it. It just kind of caught me off guard here. And when you look at it, I mean, Aaron Banks, he fits a lot of what Green Bay does. First of all, he's now their biggest off. I mean, he's massive. He's 6'5", he's 325, 320, 330. I've seen a couple of different ones out there. But he's available. He has played a ton in the last few years for the 49ers, started 43 games, posted a pass block win rate of 89.9% and a run block win rate of 66.5%. But this past year, career highs, he had a 91.7 pass block win rate and a 69% run block win rate. And just 3 sacks. He's charged with 3 sacks. So he's a massive, massive human being playing exclusively at left guard. Well, the Packers already have a left guard, Elgton Jenkins. Well, according to Tom Silverstein from the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, he's hearing that now the plan is that Jenkins will move over to center, where he's kind of has been the backup, de facto backup center. So it sounds like Jenkins is going to move to center. Banks is going to be your left guard. And to me, this is going to be kind of fascinating to see how this group plays out now because, you've heard head coach Matt LaFleur preach 5 best will play. Well, we know Banks is going to play. We know Elgton Jenkins is going to play. And we know Zach Tom is going to play. Those are like your 3 signed, sealed locks. Boom. I'd probably put Rasheed Walker in that category, just maybe a little bit below. And then you got Sean Rhyan, but then you got first-round pick from last year, Jordan Morgan. So Jordan Morgan's going to play. It's just where is he going to play? Is he going to play? Are they going to give him a shot at left tackle like they originally said last year after they drafted him? But then after they drafted him and they got into some mini camps and such, he was kind of doing more work at guard. So who's on notice? Is it going to be Sean Rhyan or is it Rasheed Walker? Or maybe is Jordan Morgan still a backup? Jordan Morgan's going to play at some point. Right now, I think it's probably going to be guard. And I think Sean Ryan's maybe the guy I noticed. But remember, Walker and Ryan are also entering the final years of their deal. Packers, I would imagine, are going to lock up Zach Tom. They're going to lock up Zach Tom. So one of those guys, whether it's Walker or Sean Ryan, I would imagine probably going to be entering their final year. Probably not going to be back. And then, you're kind of protecting yourself that way. But back to Aaron Banks, I mean, this when you look at it, again, it caught me off guard. I'm like, oh, wow, okay. So they're going to spend some money on an offensive lineman. I think we all knew that they were going to maybe look for some depth, whether it was going to be in a draft or maybe some, second-tier free agents and such. But to spend some big money on a guard, I was like, oh, okay, they did that. Again, I'm not upset about it. I'm not mad about it. I don't disagree with it. It's just like, okay, I was not expecting that to be the first one. But I think you also look at what Philadelphia probably did to him in the playoff game, and I'm sure that was still living in the minds of Goody and his staff and such. And, well, let's face it, too, when you look at the NFC and you look at what Chicago's been doing, too. I mean, Chicago's boosted up their offensive line. They've completely transformed their offensive line. They've added more defensive line help, too. You got to counter that. And quarterback play, we know it. Quarterback play, that determines more than anything whether you're going to make deep advances into the postseason, get to the championship, protect the quarterback. And then also, Banks with his run block, how massive he is. I was watching some of the film from, I think it was Brian Baldinger, going back to some old film stuff he was doing with the 49ers. And we know the 49ers like to run the ball, and they ran the ball behind Banks quite a bit, Josh Jacobs and such. So it makes sense. It's a signing that when you look at it, it makes sense for Green Bay. You can still say it's surprising, like, oh, wow, okay. But when you look at it, take a step back, it's like, okay, yeah, that definitely makes sense. I think just for me, again, what's that five going to look like for this year? How do they factor in Jordan Morgan? Do they view him more as a guard, or are they going to give him a shot at tackle? I don't know. But, hey, you got depth. You got depth on the offensive line. Not a bad thing. Nate Hobbs, corner from the Raiders. This was a guy, so yesterday when we did, some five guys to pay attention, this was a guy that I was contemplating putting in my top five, but ultimately I decided to keep him off because the one thing I thought might have been a determining factor for him was injuries. He's missed 17 games over the last 4 years, I believe it has. So he's missed some time, and I thought, okay, corner, Jair, they're frustrated with him with the injuries. You got another corner, that's missed some time over the years. Would that be a play? But apparently it wasn't. And you look at him, he's primarily, when he's played with the Raiders, been a nickel corner, played a slot corner, and he's been a really good run defender. But seen a lot of Raiders fans, and I even had some reach out to me on social media saying they love the guy. Like, they love his mindset, and they love him. The only thing that the only down part of his game or the down part of him was that he has missed quite a bit of time due to injuries and such. So that's the only downfall. But Raiders fans love the guy, from what I've heard, from what Raiders fans have told me. And the interesting part of this saw some reports out there that the Packers actually plan on making him a perimeter corner playing on the outside, which I'll be curious to see if that actually happens, if they do that, because, again, he has primarily played nickel and slot, and we know how important that position has been, especially in the last couple of years, last few years, across the league. Yeah, this was from Ryan Wood, who covers the Packers. Nate Hobbs was a slot corner with the Raiders, but source said the expectation is he will play the perimeter corner. And he's got the size to do it. He's 6 foot. He's just a shade under 200 pounds. So he has the size to move on the outside, and he has played a little bit. But, I would be curious if they get into those nickel situations. Does he slide in the inside? Maybe in a base, is he the outside corner with like a Keyshawn? And then when they slide into that nickel, does he go in there into the middle? So it could just be something like that. But I think what this signing also shows too is we saw last year again with the injuries to the secondary where Jeff Hafley, had to shuffle a lot of stuff around, right? When Jair went out, or when it was a safety that went out, like Evan Williams, they had to shuffle quite a bit of stuff around. And it really affected the way they played defense in the back end. Now you bring in a guy who's got the versatility to play inside, outside. We know Keyshawn can play inside, outside. Javon Bullard can play slot corner, safety. You got some position versatility now with some of your secondary members that maybe doesn't handcuff Jeff Hafley, or just kind of throw everything out the window for his defense when one injury can kind of derail everything. Because how many times in last season did we see where one injury to the secondary had such a huge trickle-down effect for this team that it really affected their play? You know, Evan Williams is out. Javon Bullard has to move from the slot role and playing back safety. You had issues over there. I mean, you had, a corner issue. It was kind of a mess, and you kind of felt like, okay, Hafley's got to scrap his plan, maybe in what he wants to do. And especially when it comes to the run game and Hafley's style of defense, that nickel corner, that slot corner is so important, it's so vital to helping stop the run. And now you got a guy over there he's got some good numbers in stopping the run. So, again, outside the injuries, which is a concern, I mean, it's still a concern, but outside of that, it's a signing that makes all the sense in the world. You got the versatility and the experience of a guy that's played a ton on the inside, but he could go on the outside too. So, does that mean less playing time for a guy like Javon Bullard in that slot role? Probably. Possibly. But now you got depth. Because if you do have an injury, because chances are you're going to, odds are you're going to, you got one guy that's going to be out. You've got some versatility. You've got more depth there where it won't just, kind of screw up your whole defensive game plan now. So both these signings of Banks and Hobbs may not have been the names that we kept hearing about or the names that were at the top of our wish list. May not be the sexiest names out there, but they make a ton of sense. They make a ton of sense for Green Bay, and they fit what Green Bay wants to do or what their mindset is. It makes a ton of sense in the world when you take a step back and look at it. However, now, if you were a fan or if you're still a person that believes that, okay, they still need a wide receiver and they still need a defensive lineman or an edge rusher, there was a lot of guys that got picked up yesterday, okay? And the pickings might be a little bit slim. That's just the way it is, right? I mean, day one and such. So who else is left out there? Who else is out there when it comes to some other potential targets for the Packers if they are, in fact, going to be looking at a wide receiver or a defensive lineman? So these are some of the names. Some you're going to probably recognize. Some you may not be too familiar. I'm not going to go with every single defensive lineman or wide receiver out there, but these are maybe the top ones, the best available. Okay. The ageless wonder, Calais Campbell, is still out there, defensive lineman, if you want to go for a veteran who's approaching 40. You've got DeMarcus Lawrence, edge rusher for the Cowboys. The thing that would pause me about Lawrence, he's coming off an injury, but he's coming off that Liz Frank injury. And we were just talking about that with Dr. Crow, and we've talked about that with Dr. Crow, that type of injury before. But that's the injury in the foot that can end careers. That's the injury that players struggle big time to come back from. So if it were me, okay, DeMarcus Lawrence, that's a name. He's had success. But that injury would, in my opinion, take him off the list. Maybe, if you bring him in, I think rotational player at best, pass rusher at best, but big money, no thanks. Dante Fowler. Now, this guy has been around for a while. I mean, Brad and I have talked about him because we went to the draft in Chicago the first year there. He was, third overall pick by Jacksonville. That he gets hurt right away. He's still in the league. And I think even after that injury, the guy has been, he missed his rookie year. He's, for the most part, been pretty darn healthy. 2016, 16 games, 16 games, 15 games. Then in 18-19, 7 and 8 games. But since then, 16 games, 14 games, 14 games, 17 games, 17 games. Last year, 17 games. Not necessarily a starter, but as a rotational piece. But I think, I'll be honest too, last year he's coming off 10.5 sacks. Coming off 10.5 sacks for Washington. To me, he's probably your designated pass rusher, but is that an option that could be there for Green Bay if they're looking at, okay, we need help getting after the quarterback? What about Dante Fowler Jr., bringing him in as a pass rush specialist? Again, he's not necessarily a full-time starter, and he's kind of traveled all around. I mean, Washington last year, 2 years with Dallas, couple years with Atlanta, couple years with the Rams. Maybe a 1-year deal, maybe a 2-year deal, but he's going to be your designated pass rushing specialist. That could be an option. I mean, Joey Bosa is still out there. If you think about it, if you want to try to find some connections with Joey Bosa, remember the Packers passing game coordinator, their secondary coach, Derek Ansley Jr., was defensive coordinator with the Chargers for 1 year when Joey Bosa was over there. So, I mean, there is a little bit of a connection. But Joey Bosa is over there. I mean, you've got Javon Hargrave. Again, a lot of these guys are veterans. A lot of these guys are going to be veterans, 30s, mid-30s. So maybe some of these guys, especially the veterans, are rotational guys, not necessarily going to get you 3-down plays, 4-down players. Might be, early downs to help and stop the run. Might be later downs to get after the quarterback. Jonathan Allen, defensive tackle, that apparently was visiting with the Vikings. Got cut by the Commanders earlier on. Could he be an option? And now I'm going to give you a couple of names that you're maybe not too familiar with. But let's start with somebody that's within the division. Levi Onwuzurike, the Detroit Lions. Now, he's coming off of 16 games, started 10 of those games last year for Detroit. 2022, he didn't play. He had an injured back. His rookie years in 2021, he played in 16 games. But last year, you look at the numbers, he's not a big sack guy, 1.5 sacks last year. Okay? But he's still young. He's 27 years old, just turned 27 years old. Is that a guy that Green Bay could, again, bring in as maybe a rotational pass rusher? Possibly. Green Bay's got to be pretty darn familiar with him, right? Because of being in the division. So I'm sure Green Bay is very familiar with him. But you maybe look at some of his injury history out there. I was reading a little bit from Greg Rosenthal when it comes to him. He has been plagued with back injuries for much of his career, improved his durability and consistency last year, and was a Dan Campbell favorite. A good, young, rotational lineman. Again, how much is he going to cost, though? Some other dudes. We've got from the Giants, Azeez Ojulari. Azeez Ojulari. Now, he has been with the Giants the last few years. He's only 24 years old right now. He's going to turn 25 in June, but he has got 4 years under his belt. 2021, when he was a rookie, 8 sacks, then 5.5 sacks, then 2.5 sacks, then 6 sacks this past year. Again, maybe a rotational, situational pass rusher, edge rusher. He can, he struggles a little bit in stopping the run, but he has had success going after the quarterback. The other thing, though, with him, he may be a little small. I mean, he's listed at 6'3", 240, 245. But again, if he's just a situational pass rusher as a part of that rotation, where you bring him on third downs or obvious passing situations, maybe that's when you bring him in. But again, size. Does he fit that defensive front for Green Bay? Another one. Going to the Chiefs, Charles Omenihu. Now he's a little bit bigger. You're talking 6'5", 280 pounds. Has been in the league since 2019. Started off with Houston. Spent a couple years with the 49ers. The last couple of years with the Chiefs. This past year, though, he only played 6 games, injuries, suspensions. So, I mean, that might be kind of maybe deterrent, if you will. He violated the league's personal conduct policy. He's had serious injuries in the past, but he was able to get on the field this past year a little bit for the Chiefs. And then 2 years ago, when you look at his first year with the Chiefs, he did have 7 sacks. Maybe that's, again, part of a rotation piece for Green Bay. And then this guy named Anthony Nelson, who has played with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers the last few seasons. Since 2019. Okay, 2019. He played 9 games, 0 sacks. But 2020, he played 16 games, then 17 games, then 17, then 16, then 17. And in his last few years, so last year he had 4 sacks. The year before that, 3 sacks. 5.5, 5. Again, numbers that don't jump out to you. But he is a big human being. He is listed at 6'7", 271 pounds. Maybe more, again, rotational player. And this, if you're not familiar with him, when I tell you where he's from, you'd be like, no, we don't need another version of that. He is from Iowa. So I know some people are going to say, oh, okay, older version of Lucas Van Ness. But I think when you look at these defensive linemen, defensive ends, and you look at that, Green Bay didn't get one of the high-priced players out there. Maybe it's evident, or maybe that shows us that Green Bay is just looking for a guy to add to the rotation, looking for somebody that they can bring in on early pass rush or on obvious pass rushing situations or on third downs. And they're not wanting to commit a ton of money to a defensive lineman. Not saying I agree, not saying that's what I would do, but think after, some of the signings out there and seeing who's available, I think that might be the approach Green Bay is looking. That they're going to be looking for more depth, and they're going to be looking for more guys to add to the rotation, maybe some veterans to add to the rotation. And maybe it's more of those guys who are just like your pass rush specialists, guys that you put out there on those third downs or on those obvious pass rushing situations. I think that's kind of evident right now. And maybe still looking at the draft. Same could be kind of said for the wide receivers. Because when you look at the guys who are available, they're veterans. Maybe some guys who are past their prime, not necessarily number 1 options anymore. Amari Cooper, Stephon Diggs coming off an ACL, Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, DeAndre Hopkins, Tyler Lockett, Brandon Cooks. Tyler Boyd's out there. He's a little bit younger yet, bigger wide receiver. He spent time with Tennessee, but, how much do you factor in what Tyler Boyd did because of the situation he was in? You look at what he did with Cincinnati, and, those were solid numbers, right? His last year in Cincinnati, playing essentially behind Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, 667 yards. 18-19, he did have over 1,000 yards. This year, played 16 games for Tennessee, just 390 yards receiving, and no touchdowns. But how much do you factor in? Okay, Tennessee was awful. Do you give him a shot? Again, he's 6'2", over 200 pounds. Maybe he comes in. Maybe you can get him for 1 year or a couple years. He's that veteran guy that can, you can add to your room. Guy who's been in the league since 2016. But he's not going to be a number 1. He's not going to be a number 1 like a Jamar Chase or a Justin Jefferson or a Chris Godwin or whoever. But maybe you could get him on the cheap a little bit. Maybe it's a guy like Elijah Moore. Elijah Moore, feels like Elijah Moore, who has been around for a long time. I don't know why, but he's only 24 years old. He'll actually be 25 here this month. Still young, played 4 years in the league. First 2 years with the Jets, last couple of years with the Browns. You look at the numbers, they're not eye-popping. He hasn't gone over 1,000 yards. The most he's had is 640 in 2023. He's 5'10", but he's a guy that still gets open. And you kind of wonder, okay, if this is a guy that gets put into the right offensive system, is this a guy that could do some damage? Like, to me, Elijah Moore feels like the perfect guy that would sign a one-year deal with an offense that properly utilizes him, and he could cash in because he's still young. He can go out there, begin the season at the age of 25, sign a one-year deal with an offense that puts him in the right position to succeed, and he can maybe make some cash. Last 3 years, 16 games, 17 games, 17 games. Doesn't fill the size void that is left by a guy like Christian Watson, because you're going to be missing that size, you're going to be missing that down the field threat. But this is a guy that maybe you could throw in the slot and really kind of attack the middle of the field with him, Jaden Reed, and Tucker Kraft. Or do you go with, maybe you really want to prioritize a veteran on a one-year deal, a Keenan Allen, an Amari Cooper, a Tyler Lockett, Brandon Cooks. Does he have anything? I mean, this is a guy that's been across the league almost how many? I mean, he's with what? The Saints, Patriots, Rams, Texans, Dallas. He's been in the league since 2014. Okay? He'll be 32 when the season starts. Last year was easily his worst season, just playing 10 games. But again, is he a guy that, okay, put him in the system and he would have better numbers? Maybe bringing in a veteran that way. So, for some of these guys or from these two positions that, we were in the early parts of free agency saying, oh, DK or Devontae or, defensive edges like Khalil Mack or maybe trading for these guys. Now you look at what's left from a free agency standpoint. It's like, okay, so it sure looks like Green Bay didn't want to invest long-term and big money into a wide receiver or into an edge rusher, that maybe they just want to add some veteran pieces as part of the rotation with that. That's kind of what it seems like right now. And if it were me, if I had to pick, one from each side here, I'm kind of intrigued with the Tyler Boyd, bringing him in on a 1 or maybe even a 2-year deal, but maybe it's something that you can move on after a year. I'm intrigued with that. You're bringing in some size, and maybe for a guy that's trying to kind of like get into an offensive system that he can boost up his numbers so he can cash in a little bit more. I'm intrigued with Elijah Moore, though, too. It's a little bit smaller, but Tom Brady won some Super Bowls with using some small receivers and utilizing the tight end more. So Boyd and Elijah Moore, I'm kind of intrigued with. On the defensive side, I'm intrigued with Dante Fowler, bringing him in as just your pass rush specialist. Jonathan Allen, I'd be intrigued with that too, because the Packers did lose T.J. Slayton. So I don't know if they would necessarily, he was your run stopper. He was the early down defensive lineman. He's going to the Bengals. But I feel like that's a guy that maybe you can get in a draft, or if you're looking for a bigger kind of nose tackle type of player, a guy that's just strictly going to play on rushing downs. I feel like that might be somebody you can get maybe in a draft. And because if I want Green Bay to get a passer, I want a guy, if I had to pick between the two, about getting a run stopper that's going to play in the early downs, or maybe a guy that you bring in to get after the quarterback, I kind of want to be the guy that goes after the quarterback. So I guess on this list, if I'm picking, I guess, 2 on each side, I'm intrigued with Dante and I'm intrigued with Bosa. Joey Bosa, you're probably pass rusher, part of the rotation, trying to preserve his health. Same with Dante Fowler. He's straight up just a pass rush specialist. And then, again, on the receiver side, I'm intrigued with Tyler Boyd and Elijah Moore.